Our presenters today are Marie Lenichek, who is a recovery coach here at St. Clair County Community Mental Health, and Nicole Strout, who is an outpatient counselor, recovery coach manager, and C-card trainer at Flint Odyssey Outpatient. And with that, I'll turn it over to our presenters today.
Good morning, everybody. Like Sarah said, my name is Marie. I am a recovery coach here at CMH. I've been here for a little over 4 years now. And I'm just going to get started sharing a little bit about my history, and then I'll jump into like my recovery. So I originally grew up in the Macomb area, in like the suburb area. I have a mom and my 2 brothers. And before that, though, we did live a few different places. And then in 2001, when I was about 8 or 9 years old, my father ended up committing suicide. So then we moved, just me and my mom, my brothers moved out to the suburbs in Macomb. That's kind of where I grew up. I was pretty average. I enjoyed school. I enjoyed hanging out with my friends. And then kind of as I got into my teenage years is when I started exploring with substances. So I started probably around 15 with smoking marijuana. I want to say it was 15 or 16. And that kind of just kickstarted everything. At that age, it was kind of normal to do that. So I didn't really think that it was an issue then. Until I got a little older, years progressed, I started taking more substances like pills or things like that. And then I was smoking weed like all day, every day. I couldn't go a day without anything. And that continued to progress until, at that time, it was really still not an issue for me because I was still so young. So I didn't see it as, a big issue then. And then as it kind of progressed, I kind of started thinking, well, maybe I should stop, but I couldn't. I didn't know how to then. And by the age of 19, I began using heroin. And it wasn't shortly after that I started using it IV. And I had used that for a few years, and my life just continued on this like downward spiral very fast. And I couldn't hold a job. I would have times where I would go a full year without any employment. There was times when I had no phone, no car, no job, anything. And somehow I found a way to continue using. And then I entered treatment for the first time when I was either just before, turning 20 or when I was 20. And I went there and it was great. I got off heroin. I got detoxed properly. I got out and that was it. I didn't know what else to do. I just got out and was like, okay, I expected myself to just, start living life as a normal person and, get a job and go back to school and all these things, and, when I was younger, I struggled a lot with anxiety and depression, and I never really was able to treat that because every time I would enter counseling or, rehabs and stuff, I didn't address that as the issue. It was always just that the drugs were the issue, that I needed to just stop that and I would be okay. So that was my belief at the time. I got out of treatment and I was like, okay, the drug use is gone and now I can just function normally. And that just wasn't the case for me. I had lost my whole young adult life to using, and I had no idea how to live life. I was full of anxiety all the time. I couldn't even go to job interviews. I couldn't do even just calling to make a doctor appointment. Those things I just couldn't even do. And not long after I had gotten out of treatment, that first time I started using again because I didn't see a way around it. And at that time I was really, really hopeless. I had felt like, I wasn't going to get better, that this was just the way that it was supposed to be for me. And I was probably going to die in active addiction. And I was just so hopeless. And so I continued using on and off again for probably another 6 months to a year. I went back to treatment again. And again, the same thing happened. I left treatment and I shortly after started using again because I didn't do anything different. I was in an unhealthy relationship with somebody who also used, and we were just very codependent. We would relapse right after we both went to treatment together, and we would just continue that cycle, and that continued for another year or so. And I went to treatment again, and that time I actually didn't even complete treatment. I just left early. I was like, this is just not working. It's just not for me. I still feel like crap. And so I left. That was the last time that I went to treatment. I think that was in probably 2012 or 13. And after that, I did end up relapsing and continue using. And then I had a pretty scary situation. I had overdosed and I woke up in the hospital, and I left the hospital and kept using. That same morning as after I left, I continued to use. And I was even more hopeless then than I was the first time I went to treatment, because that belief was reinforced for me every time I left treatment and didn't have any solutions. This was just the way it was. This was who I was. I wasn't going to be able to get healthy. I wasn't going to be able to be happy. I wasn't going to be able to change. And I was so hopeless. And, I was bouncing around from friend house to my mom's house to, wherever I could go, and just so unhappy. And so then my mom actually came to me and she said, I had run out of options. I had nowhere to go. So I was back at her house and she said, you cannot stay here and use. And she was like, I found this place. It's in Port Huron. It's a 3/4 house, and you can go there, or, you have to leave home. I can't do this anymore. And at that time, I had never heard of like Port Huron. I had never heard of like really a 3/4 house. I had maybe heard it mentioned in like treatment a couple times. But I had no idea really what it meant. I didn't know what it entailed, what was going to be required of me, where Port Huron was. I had no idea, but I also knew like I didn't have any other options. And, in my mind, I was like, well, I can just go out there for a few months, get myself together, get clean again, and then just come back home. So, shortly after I had that overdose, she told me that, and not long, like maybe a week later, I was moving up here to a 3/4 house. And, when I got there, I was still detoxing off of substances. I still was coming off of heroin. I still was coming off of, pills. I was coming off of marijuana, all of that when I got there. And thank God at the time, they were able to accept me with, that all going on still. And, the director said, as long as when we drop you in a week or so, that your levels are going down and, all of that. And I was able to do that. I was able to enter and stay sober and, try and make it work at the 3/4 house. So, I go to the 3/4 house. It was interesting to me because I was living in a house full of women. And that was something I obviously was very unfamiliar with, being, growing up with not only two brothers, but as a young adult living with boyfriends and stuff like that. So I was very unfamiliar with the role of having friends that were women that were supportive. And that was actually pretty cool. It was really cool to build relationships and have these other women around me who were trying to do the same thing as me. Not all of them were, some were just there because they had to be, but some were there to try and get better and to try and get clean and stay clean. And, at first I think I was 21 when I entered the 3/4 house. And so, I was still so young. I wasn't sure that like it was going to work. I wasn't sure that, I would be able to do it. I just kind of went there and just went with the motions. I did what they kind of told me to do. I had gotten a job at a gas station. And I went to work. I started going to NA meetings, which was the first time in my life that I had gone to meetings and participated. Before that, when I was younger, I had gotten in trouble with the law and was on probation and told to go to NA meetings. So I would go back, then and just sit there and not really participate, not really listen. I would go there high or whatever, and it didn't mean anything to me. So this was the first time entering into like a program like NA and actually like listening to people. I would go with women from my house and we would go and just, it was actually a really good time, and it taught me a lot about, connecting with other people and the importance of connecting with other addicts and what they can offer me and what eventually I would be able to offer them. And so I continued that, and I relapsed at a time. I think I was there not even 6 months. I had a small relapse because I was hanging out with people who weren't really, serious about their recovery. They weren't really, they were kind of half in, half out, weren't really sure. And we had all hung out one night, and it just kind of happened. And at that time when I had used, that one time, I the next day I was like, I'm not, I can't do that again. I don't want to do that. I still wasn't sure how this recovery was gonna like help me, but I also knew like I didn't want to keep using, and I did not want to keep repeating the same things over and over again. In my mind, I was like, I'm in my 20s now, like I'm starting to get to a point where like I want a life. And I knew that if I kept doing that, I would never have one. So, I had that little relapse, and that time the quarterhouse did not find out because it was just that one night. And then I was able to stop after that because, like I said, I just didn't want to do that. And so I stayed there again, I continued to stay there. And I stayed there for probably a little over a year, I think. At the time, the three quarterhouse, you were able to stay there. Nowadays they usually stay about 6 months, but at the time I was able to stay there for a little over a year. And so I managed to get a year clean. I was continuing to do all the things that they told me to do. I was going to meetings. I had gotten a sponsor. I was starting to do like the step work through NA, and it was working. I was staying clean. And I met my boyfriend. I met him he was also living at Vision Quest. I met him probably about 6 months after I had been there, and we started dating, and I stayed in the three quarterhouse. He stayed in the three quarterhouse. And when I got to my year clean, we both did actually, we decided to get an apartment together. So we stayed out here in Port Huron. We got our apartment together, and it was good for a while until I kind of stopped doing what I needed to do. I stopped kind of going to the NA meetings. I thought, at that time, I thought, well, it's been so long since I've used, like I'm okay now. And he did too. We kind of, again, went back into that little codependent thing. And we both kind of stopped doing that when we moved out, and we were good for a little while. And then one day I came home, or he came home or something, and he was high. And in my mind, I was like, well, if he did it, I'm fine to do it too. So I went and I got high one day, and that was at about a year and a half clean. And at that point, I wasn't doing anything for my recovery. I wasn't going to meetings. I was just working and coming home and hanging out with him. I really wasn't having any friends either. It was kind of just like, again, I got into that cycle of the codependence. And for me, like that is another addiction, as I've stayed in recovery, the amount of time that I have, I've learned that my addiction definitely, trickles its way into other areas in my life. It's not just with drugs or alcohol. And that's kind of what happened there. And so I relapsed for about a week or two. And then I decided to get on the Vivitrol shot, which I had taken before before I moved to Port Huron, and it didn't really work because I wasn't ready to stop. So, this time again, I remembered how I felt and I was like, I really don't want to do this again. I still had that belief that I wanted to stay clean, but I wasn't really sure what to do. But I also knew that Vivitrol would help make that decision easier for me. It kind of took away that choice that I had for at least 30 days, because that's kind of how long Vivitrol lasts, is about 30 days. It's an opiate and alcohol blocker. So I went to my Vivitrol prescriber and I was like, listen, like I need to get on this. And, I used a few days ago, but like I really need this, or I don't think I'll be able to stop using. And I wasn't willing to go back to treatment then either. So I kind of just convinced my doctor to give me the Vivitrol, even though, I still had marijuana and, I don't think I had opiates in my system, but so I got the Vivitrol shot, and it hadn't been that long after I used, so I went into withdrawal, and that was not fun. That lasted for about a week, tapering off throughout the week, but that was not fun. And that was the last time that I used. That was almost 5 years ago now, and so I started, I started going back to meetings. I reconnected with my sponsor. I was like, listen, like I really, really feel like I want to start working the steps again, going to meetings, working the steps, meeting with her. So I started to do that, and I really started to give myself a chance, because I don't know when that little flip switched, but it was definitely after that last relapse when I decided, I just have to give myself the best shot at this, because, I learned again that at a year and a half clean, I couldn't just do nothing for my recovery. Like I had to have something, whether it be meetings, people in recovery, spirituality, therapy, I had to have something. And so that is when I realized after that relapse that, I needed something. And so I got pretty serious about my recovery, and I really started to put my all into it and stay connected with my sponsor and stay in contact with her. And unfortunately, my boyfriend, he couldn't do that. He wasn't ready. And so, we ended up splitting up. He left. He was in and out of rehab a lot. He ended up moving back into the 3-quarter house. He could manage to get a few months together here and there. And then we broke up for a while. We broke up for about 3 or 4 months. We didn't talk really. And then, we got back together, and I had gotten pregnant. And that is when, obviously I have my son. He's actually home right now with me because his daycare's closed down right now because one of the kids had COVID. So he's here with me now. But so I'd gotten pregnant, and he had my son's father, he managed to get a year clean again. At the time he just a second. He had so he had managed to get a year clean again. So in my mind, I thought, this is good. We'll have our son. We really cared about each other. And I continued to work my recovery, and, he was doing what he could for his recovery. And, we had my son, and, things were okay. And then me and my son's father kind of grew apart at about, when my son was, I think 1, we decided to split ways. And so he moved out, and we did 50-50 with our son, and it was fine. And I've still been doing really well in my recovery at this point, and I was continuing my meetings. I was, doing open talks even. Like I had gotten, I think 2 years, maybe. Yeah, I had about 2 years clean at that time, and I was still really connected. My sponsor had become me and her had become really close. I had built up a lot of support in recovery. I was sponsoring other women even. Um, and then, my son's dad started using again. And that was really hard because that was like one of my worst fears for my son, was to go through that um, with his father, losing my own father at a young age, but suddenly was hard. But watching him lose his father while he was still alive was pretty painful. And knowing that it was because of addiction, it really sucked, because I, in my mind, knew that I had a solution. And, a lot of other people in recovery go through this too. We get clean, and there's other people in our lives that we care about that we just wish they would get it, but it's the same, because I recognize that nobody could wish that for me. They could wish it, but it doesn't mean that I was ready. And he wasn't ready, and he continued to use, and it just got worse and worse. And then October last year, he passed away from an overdose. And that also was like the biggest fear in my life, was my son growing up without a father, because I had to. And I went into a little depression after that. And I again like recognized that, I remembered how I felt how I felt really hopeless in my early recovery, and how I remembered that I needed to do something. And I remembered that when I did something, it helped. When I committed to something and put my all into it, it helped, and I felt better. So that's what I did when after he passed away, I had the depression, and I started to go into real therapy. And I say real therapy as in like my on my side, not that the therapists aren't real, but like me going into real therapy and giving it my best and my all, and getting really honest, because there were also things from my childhood that I hadn't worked through. And it was all a contributing factor. When he passed away, it kind of all just built up for me. And I was like, I really need to get into some trauma therapy and start working through a lot of the stuff that I've never worked through. Because there was always, even though I had, 3 years clean at the time, there was still parts of me that I knew were still affected by this trauma. We're still, and I'm talking about, childhood trauma. There were still parts of me in the way that I had relationships with men, or my son's father, that I knew were affected because of the trauma as a child. So, after he passed away, I was just ready to let all that stuff go. And I, not only wanted to work through the trauma that I had with him, but like I said, the childhood trauma, I was ready to work through that and go to like that next level of my recovery, because the pain had become great enough. And that's always one of the biggest factors for me, is when my pain is great enough, then I'll do something to change. And it sucks sometimes, because a lot of times I wish I would do something sooner. But I know for me that is one of the biggest motivating factors, is I just get to a point where I've had enough. And I've learned enough times in recovery that, when I'm at that point, I have to do something, because I've learned previously, when I don't do something, I end up using again, or, I end up miserable. And that's happened in my recovery too, is where I don't do anything, and I just end up unhappy or depressed. And, so I got into some real trauma therapy, and I continued, my meetings still. And my sponsor, me and her had gotten really, really close. She's still, she's my best friend. She's my biggest supporter today in recovery. And so yeah, I really got into that therapy, and I just started giving it my best. And I started, I actually started an antidepressant too, which was something that I was completely against for most of my recovery, because I didn't want to depend on anything again. I didn't want to have to depend on anything to make me feel like I was okay besides the work that I put into my recovery. And unfortunately, I came to a point where I was like, I have to, I have to at least try this because I don't want to keep feeling this way. And if it's just something that gets me to a point where I'm well enough to do therapy and, my day-to-day stuff, then I do. And it did, it helped. I got on the antidepressant and in the therapy, and I started to feel better. I started to feel healthy again. And I even started to feel like I was recovering more than I had been even before he passed away. And so that's kind of where I'm at today. So it's almost been a year since he passed away. In October it'll be a year. And this last year of my recovery, I've really kind of delved a lot deeper into myself. It's not so much about wanting to use anymore. It's more about wanting to be better and feel better and live my life to the best that I can. And Carolyn, what point in your recovery do you feel was the biggest game changer? Was it your mother telling you that you had to leave and go to Port Huron? Just would like, what was your biggest aha? So, I don't think that was it. I think that seeing that my mom, everything that I put her through was a point of change for me to want to, kind of go away and try and do better. But again, like I said, when I moved out here, even after everything that I had put her through, I still relapsed. The biggest aha moment for me was after that last relapse that I had 5 years ago, where I was sick and tired of feeling the way that I felt. It really was that. It wasn't any probation or my family or people around me. It was from within me. It was inside me where I just realized, and I can't really pinpoint what it was that made me feel that way. I think it was because I had gotten a year and a half clean and I thought I was good, and then all of a sudden I wasn't. All of a sudden I was using again. And that was a big, I think, shock for me because I had thought that I was going to be fine and I really wasn't. And when I did move out here though, I think that's really when my recovery started, was when I did move into the 3/4 house. So I think that aha moment for me, I guess I would say, was when I moved in there and realized that like other people were recovering. I wasn't really sure how it was going to work for me, but I knew that it was really cool seeing other people live life clean without drugs, and other people that had done the same things that I had done. It was seeing that in other people that kind of inspired me to continue in my recovery. And it wasn't like a moment though. It really was like a process for me of coming to a point where I had had enough of repeating the same things and going through the same cycles of codependency, using, depression, anxiety. I just, it built up over the years. And I was like, it really was when I started to give my recovery that true chance that I started to believe that I could get better. It wasn't until I had already been clean and working a program that I really had the realization that like, I can do this. I can get better. I can live in recovery. I can be a good mom to my son, and accept things like him losing his father, accepting that, and, being grateful for things I do have. And, I still have bad days, and, but, I'm still in therapy now. I'm still working through that stuff. And, that's at 5 years clean. And it just because somebody gets clean and stuff, a lot of times people think that they're fine. And to me, that's just not the case. And, everything I've witnessed says that too. We have to do something more than just stop using. And it's been a factor, all of the things that I've talked about, and building my spirituality was a big part of it too, relying on like a higher power that I heavily rely on that today too, building a connection with that, whether it be through church or through other people or reading or meditation, having that part of my recovery, my spirituality, where no one else was involved in it, was just me and my higher power. That's a big part of my life today too. I really rely on that a lot, my faith and, prayer and meditation, things like that. was a big part of it too. But that also took time. You know, that's taken years for me to build that and believe in that and have faith in something, you know. So that's a big part of it for me too. Sarah, when did you notice that link between past trauma and your recovery, and has engaging in trauma therapy strengthened your recovery further? I think that I really realized, so I left this part out, but about 3 years ago, I had let one of my friends move in with me, and she ended up overdosing and passing away in my apartment. And that was a traumatic event in itself. So I think that when I go through traumatic things in recovery, it reminds me that I'm still not healed from my childhood stuff. So I think when she kind of passed away, it brought up a lot of stuff for me. And you know, I had realized that like there's more that I need to work through. And at that time, I wasn't ready. Like I said, when the pain's great enough for me, you know, it took my son's father passing away for me to really want to work on my trauma. And 100% engaging in trauma therapy strengthens my recovery, because I am a more healed person. And that's what recovery is all about, is healing ourselves. And, you know, not only do addicts go through, most of us go through traumatic stuff as children, but even using drugs or drinking alcohol, the trauma we put ourselves through, you know, that is all trauma. And working through that in recovery strengthens my recovery so much. It gives you that hope that like, okay, I can continue this and get better. Like, you know, the more well I get, the more traumas that I work through, the better I feel internally, and the more healthy of a person I feel. So all of that has contributed to where I am today, and I continue to, you know, work through things as they come up. Recovery doesn't mean that my life's perfect. It just means that I am in recovery, and I continue to be in recovery in every aspect of my life. And yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole now to share her experience. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Marie. I was looking forward to hearing your story. That was awesome. And I can really relate a lot to what you were saying. So for me, first of all, my name is Nicole Straub, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. And, you know, addiction looks different for everybody. A lot of stories people tell you might be able to relate to, or it sounds like your kids, or, you know, a lot of people that are, that work in this profession, you know, my story is going to sound like your clients, might sound like your kids, it might sound like you. And, you know, for me, I had about a 20-year addiction with multiple substances. And, you know, I grew up in Swartz Creek in Genesee County, and my parents did not, basically nobody in my family had problems with drugs or alcohol. I realized looking back that I had some untreated mental health issues, that substances started to become my solution. And when I found that those substances ended up working for how I was feeling, I stopped looking for solutions, right? I stopped looking at mental health therapy and proper medications as an option, just because drugs and alcohol were working. I had some hiatuses in addiction earlier on in my 20s, like when I had my kids, and when I went through my divorce, you know, I was able to kind of pull myself together and do what I had to do to take care of my kids. I got married at 21. I had my son at 23 and my daughter at 26, and I thought I was doing pretty good. It was normal practice for the people we hung out with to be smoking marijuana most days. And, you know, we went a couple, 2, 3, 4, I guess, increasingly nights where we would drink. I started working in the bars at 27 and got exposed to a few more things. I found out that cocaine made me an outgoing, energetic, just like exciting waitress that would just, I wanted to be like those other waitresses that had all that personality. And so I used for a long time, I used it as an excuse that, hey, this helps me make money, helps me be outgoing. And and that was my concept. Like, I really I didn't look at my use of drugs like it was a bad thing. It was just what I chose to do. And a lot of the people I was around chose to do them. And I always looked at for me, it was like, oh, like this is helpful in these different areas. I did end up being able to stop doing cocaine for a couple of years. And so that first time that I stopped doing cocaine for a couple of years, I thought, see, look, I can quit anytime I want to. And so when I started picking it back up again, that's when I found like that it was a little harder the next time to stop on my own. I ended up getting introduced to pain pills, narcotics, through some different health issues. And it was it was like the easy solution. Doctors would just say, oh, you're in pain, here's pain pills, and come see me every 30 days. It was working. So I didn't look for anything else. I didn't, ask them like how to fix this. The pills worked. At some point, I recently just did some reflection on this. Like that whole pill thing, that whole narcotic thing was such a gradual process, right? Like it started out taking them as prescribed, and then I started taking some extra, and then I would run out, and a friend of mine would just give me some of hers. And none of that seemed like an addict. None of that seemed like a problem, because over years of being on pain pills, your tolerance goes up. When she would run out, she said, I have a friend who sells them. And, then, okay, so now I can buy these as much as I want. And I keep saying, what was working before isn't working now. So I need to take more. And I'm prescribed this. So I'm not taking something that's not prescribed to me, because I, of course, kept getting my prescriptions. I had no idea at the time that I was enjoying what those opiates were doing to my mind as much as they were my body. Because whenever I would have a point where I couldn't get any more and I'd run out, I would feel that pain again. And I just thought it was the pain reoccurring. So, I'm going through some detox from these opiates, and I don't even realize that's what it is, because I just thought it was the pain that I took them for was returning. And so I still, again, would justify. So a couple of years after engaging with doing now pain pills, cocaine, alcohol, and marijuana, I'm working in bars. Everybody's doing this. And my boyfriend at the time did not know I was doing cocaine. And he happened to lose his job and pay a little bit more attention to our checkbook, and saw some of my behaviors, and said, you need to get some help. And I said, help for what? He says, you need to, for you to stop. And I said, I don't have a problem. I choose to do this. I want to do this. I can stop anytime I want to. I just choose not to. He's like, well, you're gonna need to stop if you want to stay here. So I said, okay, fine. And so he dropped me off at my first NA meeting, and I thought, oh my God, what is this? And when they started reading those cards, specifically who's an addict, and I heard their description, and it tied into everything that my behaviors and thought processes at that time. And I literally cried through most of that meeting, because that was the first time I actually could see, not accept, could see that my behavior was that of an addict. And at that point, I did end up struggling to quit. So that was the first time I tried to quit and couldn't. And that was like an aha moment for me, that, oh my gosh, I have to deal with the fact that, I'm actually addicted to this stuff. And then in 2010, I went to treatment for the first time. I went to detox because I was drinking, using marijuana. I was taking Xanax at that time. I always say I lit up that drug screen like a Christmas tree because it was just everything. So my detox was pretty harsh, and I remember thinking I will never pick this stuff up again. I don't ever want to have to go through this again. And people would say, well, you don't have to, like, you never have to go through that again. And I went through some residential treatment, and I struggled a bit, and I was pretty defiant. I remember crying and calling my dad, you got to come get me. And he said, no, I don't want you to die. And he's crying. I don't want to bury you. I'm not coming to get you. And I stuck it out. I got out of treatment, and some of the meetings that I had been going to before treatment, I met a sponsor. And so she would, help me go into a regular schedule for meetings and doing stuff like that. But she really wasn't, or she was encouraging me to do things like step work and events. And I'm like, I'm going to these meetings. What more do I need to do? And, also, like, I have to raise kids, go to school, and keep a job. So in between that, then I might have time for some of your meetings. And she kept telling me at that time, anything you put before your recovery, you're going to lose. And it just didn't resonate. And the first three things that when I relapsed and picked back up that I lost were taking care of my kids, my job, and school. And so I didn't need any more convincing at that point. I was able to stay clean that first time for about 6 months before I relapsed. And I thought I was a functioning addict at that point. Okay, now I just need to control my drug use better. And I tried that for about a year before I finally got evicted from my apartment, and my kids had to go live with their dad. So I was starting to see that the control that I thought I had, because, like that first time when I quit using cocaine and I just stopped, like that's how I thought it would be. And so it was becoming increasingly more difficult to stay clean on my own and to control this stuff. And ever since I was young and drinking, like in high school, I went all out. Like, I drank until I passed out. And that's just how I used drugs and alcohol. There was no moderation to begin with. So I don't know what made me think that that I could actually control anything. And jumping back, when I was 23, I was diagnosed bipolar. And, they would make suggestions on therapies and medications and stuff. But see, I had found drugs and alcohol as my solution. And your medications don't make me feel any different, is what I'm thinking. Plus, I'm not sober to know what it's going to do anyways. And so I really didn't work on my mental health. I guess things kind of, having my kids have to move in with their dad, and me not be able to take care of them. And it kind of put me into this spiral. Like, now I'm using because I don't have my kids, but I don't have my kids because I keep using. And that spiral, that circle, it's just this unending loop of just depression. I was getting more and more and deeper into using anything. At this point now, my drug of choice is more of whatever you have, more of whatever I can get. I stopped being picky, anything to alter my mood and not let me think about the pain that I had caused my family and some of the dangerous situations I had put my kids in while I was out getting drugs. When I was, so when I was about 35, my opiate tolerance had gotten up to about $80 to $100 a day for pills. And when you barely can keep a job and you're hustling all over town, that's a pretty hard habit to keep up on your own. And I met a guy, and he not only totally co-signed my bullshit and said, oh yeah, like, I got my own stuff and what you're doing is like whatever. And I'm like, well, it's stuff. He's like, well, I got my stuff, and I don't have a problem with you doing your stuff. And within a couple of days, I figured out his stuff was heroin. And so we would go get $80 worth of pills from my guy, and he'd get $20, $40 worth of heroin and be done all day. And I was like, wow, like, that sounds financially much better idea. And so I started snorting heroin, and I no longer went to my pills. And I justified that an opiate's an opiate, and what difference does it make? And, I justified myself into that. And it took me so far into my addiction that that I ended up marrying this man, and we were ridiculous, Bonnie and Clyde all over town, criminal behavior, and just just dangerous situations where we're driving around high, and sometimes with my kids. And I had at this point been able to gain some custody of my kids, but he thought that I was clean and I was doing better. And it was hard to manage. It was really hard to manage. After about 6 to 8 months of snorting heroin, I ended up going to IV heroin use. My IV heroin use, they say all the consequences that can happen, like they all happened in like 6 months. This was no joke. First thing that happened was I shot up in my ankle, and I ended up getting an infection, like a strep infection that got into my vein, my saphenous vein, the main vein in your leg. And it ended up going all the way up my leg before I would go get medical treatment, because I'm going to have to tell these medical professionals how I did this. And by that time, by the time I went to the hospital, I'd thrown 2 blood clots. I was in septic shock. They put me in ICU and said, I hope we can save your life, and then maybe we can save your leg. And I thought they were going to give me antibiotics and send me home. So I ended up having my saphenous vein removed from my leg, part of my ankle from the infection, and a skin graft to cover my ankle. And I stayed in the hospital 2 weeks, and I said, I will never go through that again. Of course, the whole time I'm in the hospital, they're pumping me full of like Dilaudid and Xanax and all this stuff. So when I get out, I'm the same addict that went in. They gave me a full prescription of narcotics to take home, and that night I sold them and bought heroin. You would think that was like a life-altering thing that would happen and you'd be done. But the thing is, I was the same. My thinking was the same going into that hospital as it was coming out. About a month and a half later, I had my first overdose. I was in a Walgreens bathroom, and a 6-year-old girl came in and found me on the floor, told her mom and the manager, who called 911, and the sheriff's deputy and the paramedic were like, I woke up to them picking me up and pulling my pants up. And I'm saying, whoa, I'm fine. Everything's good. And the sheriff's deputy said, because we just saved your life. And I had no idea what naloxone or Narcan was. So I didn't know what they were talking about. And she basically, she says, we're taking you to the hospital. And I said, no, I'm fine now. I'm just going to go home. And she held up my kit of all the supplies that I used to shoot up dope. And she said, hospital or jail? And I said, Hurley Hospital, thank you. So that was my first experience with an overdose, and it did scare the crap out of me. But there were so many times I did use that I didn't overdose. Maybe that was just a fluke, right? And then over that summer, this was my last summer using. That summer, that overdose happened in like June. In August, so my ex-husband and I were running all over time, hustling, doing some criminal activity basically. And I ended up getting charged with larceny, and they took me to jail. And I spent eight days detoxing off heroin in the Genesee County bullpen, the holding cells. And that was a pretty humbling experience as a mother who used to be a soccer coach, a Girl Scout leader, PTA mom, like all that stuff. And here I sit years later in jail detoxing off heroin with a larceny charge. And I said, what in the hell is going on? Like, who am I? And so when I got out, I'm still the same addict that I getting out as I was going in. I did go in, I signed up for treatment. And back then when you went and scheduled treatment, it was like 2 weeks out. So about actually the same day that I signed up for treatment, I was so humiliated and I was so just depressed that I had gotten myself this far that I have to go to treatment. And I ended up overdosing that night. And my husband at the time took me up the basement stairs and put me, called 911, and the sheriff's deputy showed up again to bring me back to life. And this time they were able to do it. And I guess we were minutes away. I went to treatment on September 5th, 2013, and that's my sobriety date. It's been a crazy road, and it involved recovery housing, women's recovery housing, for about 6 months. I was able to gain some respect and some trust with my family. I was working in Alcoholics Anonymous program, and I have a new sponsor that I have with Alcoholics Anonymous, and she's still my sponsor today. And so I enjoy working that program. And then I started sponsoring girls, and I loved it. I love to watch the light come on in people. And so I started applying for recovery coaching positions all over town. And they kept saying, Nicole, you have to have like a year or two sober. And I'm like, I'll get there. Just hire me. Just teach me. What do I need to do? And I spent about every 6 months applying to recovery coaching positions with no training all over town. And I ended up being able to get hired in 2016. I was about two and a half maybe years sober. And I got hired in as a recovery coach. At that time, a lot of places didn't have recovery coaches. It was kind of like, it was more like residential, not so much outpatient stuff. And so I was able to get a job as a recovery coach. And I was the first one at that outpatient site at Sacred Heart Flint. And I had to open my mind to multiple pathways because they were a methadone clinic as well. And I did take the C-card training, and I learned how to do coaching. I learned a lot from supervision. So everybody at my job had never had an coach. They didn't know what to do with me. They basically just told me what not to do, and I had to kind of figure things out on my own. And it was a difficult process, and I really wish I would have had more mentorship. So that was something that right away I knew I wanted to do for the community, was be supportive to people who are coaches, because we have our own recoveries to worry about, and we're trying to guide other people in their recovery. And we really do need the support to keep an eye on, making sure that we're okay. And so I currently work with Flint Odyssey Outpatient Services in Flint. And I started in as a recovery coach, and then was so gratefully awarded the opportunity to become a counselor, outpatient counselor. So I got about a year left in my development plan for my CADC, and I do some counseling, and I also do some personal recovery coaching, and I was awarded some promotion into some leadership. So recovery coach leadership, which is just absolutely where my heart is at, being able to coach, guide, lead, mentor, support people in recovery as recovery coaches, and the role that we play in the community and in the treatment process. I really get a chance to work with Port Huron Odyssey House over on Griswold, and I work with the Flint adult outpatient, where my office is at on Lapeer Road. And then I also work with the adolescent program that Flint has. I truly enjoy watching people become strong, stable members of the recovery community, and then turn that back into reaching out and helping others to do the same. I got certified as a CCAR recovery coach trainer, which is just one of my passions. I just love watching people in recovery want to give back and get better at it, and use that peer support of recovery in general to be able to continue, pushing it forward into a career. And it's the sky's the limit. So last Sunday, I celebrated 8 years clean and sober. And I absolutely love what I do. I still attend AA fellowship, but about 4 years ago, I found the holistic recovery community. And I do a lot with holistic services like Reiki, meditation and mindfulness. There's a lot of different, like aromatherapy, and a lot of things that we can do to increase our awareness and our spiritual connection with recovery. So they complement each other, right? Like the AA and the holistic. So that's pretty much my story, unless anybody has any questions. I really love working for the Flint Odyssey House. They have our, in 1966, we opened our residential program, and that's on MLK in Flint. And they also have now for about, I think it's about maybe 3 or 4 years, we now have a medical detox center at that building. Saginaw has a women's residential and men and women's recovery housing. Port Huron has wonderful outpatient counseling, recovery coaching, group services like group therapy services, and we have women's recovery housing, and coming up here in the near future is going to be some men's recovery housing. So also in Flint, we have where I work, the outpatient building, and we have about, 12 men and women's recovery housing. One of the things that I love about, one of the things I love about Odyssey is that they're one of their biggest things is family reunification. So you can take your children to treatment, which was a huge barrier for a lot of people. Who's going to watch my kids while I go to rehab? So you can bring your children with you. And that's for residential and in housing. So I've been awarded an opportunity to watch families actually recover together, and it's an amazing experience. So if you guys have any questions for me or for Flint Odyssey, my email is nicole.s as in Sam, TROUB @odysseyvillage.com, and I'd be happy to get you connected to services that you'd be interested in. Okay, so the moderator just put that in there. So I'm grateful to St. Clair County Mental Health for inviting me, and I hope I was able to show you what the face and voices of recovery look like. I was a heroin addict. I was an alcoholic. I'm a person in recovery, but reducing the stigma for what people think of. Unless people die and that's how they're remembered, I don't think a lot of times they know what people in recovery look like, because we look like everybody else now. So thanks a lot, you guys.
Hey, I just have one question I want to ask you guys, and either of you can pop on and answer. We had asked this at a different session, but what are some resources or supports that people might not think of that folks in recovery can really use? So people, might think of traditional things like medication-assisted treatment and therapy, but what are some other supports that people need to kind of make that next step that we might not always think about?
Recovery coaches. Marie and I are recovery coaches. If you want resources, that's our thing. That's what we do, is get you connected and know our areas, get information in different areas. Like I can call Marie, she can call me, and we can put our heads together about what kind of stuff you want, what you're looking for. I think recovery coaches are like an essential part of the recovery program and treatment right now. What do you think, Marie?
Yeah, I agree. I think recovery coaches have the best insight onto resources for people in recovery or people trying to get into recovery. And there's a lot of programs, like in Port Huron, there's the Blue Water Recovery Outreach Center. They have recovery coaches there. CMH has recovery coaches, Odyssey House. And like, Nicole said, both of our emails are now in the chat, and you can email either of us for resources like that too. Or any recovery coach, like Nicole said, we all link together. We have a Recovery Coach Alliance, and we're all a part of it. And, there's a lot of resources. It depends on what the need is, and we will help get that. Is there any resources to send people we serve to become a recovery coach? So there is the CCAR training. I'm not familiar as much with that one. I went through the DHS one. So, and that was through CMH when I had gotten hired here. So the CCAR one, I'm sure Nicole can fill you in on how that one works.
Yeah, Flint Odyssey is offering like 4 recovery coach trainings a year. We just got done with one in Port Huron, and our next one's going to be in Flint in January. If you shoot me an email and you want to get some information on applications. We are accepting applications for that. And it's called a CCAR certification. And then Marie's talking about the state certification through DHHS. And I do believe, Marie, do you think that their MDHHS, if you look under recovery oriented systems of care, they have access to different state trainings, because they're certified state trainers, like in all different areas. I think they're, yeah.
Yep, and they do have that on the MDHS website under the recovery. There's one for mental health and substance use. So there's the PSS for the mental health and the recovery coach for substance use. So they have both of those on the website, and they just fill out the application. And as far as the costs though, that was funded by CMH for me because I was an employee here. So the state one does cost. And I don't know, what's the CCAR one like?
But Honesty House is not charging for our trainings right now. So in the future that may change. We might have to start charging, but we are actually covering the cost through grant funding and whatnot. So we can definitely make arrangements for somebody who can't afford to pay. And so you can get your your CCAR certification. If you just send me an email, I just send out the applications.
Awesome.
Thank you both so much today for hopping on and sharing your stories. A lot of the comments have just been thanking you both and talking about how inspirational it's been. And I will say it's one of the greatest joys of putting together an event like this is hearing stories like yours. So thank you both so much. So today's presentation is one of many webinars scheduled throughout the month of September, which is Recovery Month. And you can still register for any of the upcoming trainings, even up to minutes before they start, at sccmh.org. Thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.